Hi, I'm Haley from Story Brewers, and today I'm going to be explaining every detail in this 19th century letter. Why is it important? And what does it reveal? The letter I'm looking at today is from our epistolary game, My Late Father's Correspondence. And it is from day 4 of the game, so if you're not up to day 4 yet, get there first, as there will be spoilers. If you want a spoiler-free video, check out the one I made of the very first letter in the game, which I've linked in the description. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that looms large in the game, and that is the military. But it won't be the only topic I'm talking about, there will be plenty more juicy details. Okay, let's get into it. The letter I'm looking at today has been written on December 8th, 1832, and it is addressed to Agatha Lockley at Eadley Hall, Millcote, Hampshire. So I'm going to read the letter first, and then I'll be talking about all the little clues this letter gives us. Dear Miss Lockley, your aunt told me that I might call upon you when I return to Hampshire next week. It will be a delight to restore our old acquaintance after so many years. Your aunt has said you are short on good company, and in truth I am the same, especially with Christmas so close approaching. It is my first return to Hampshire since my guardian's death in India. Colonel Hughes, a friend of your father's. Do you remember him? Now I have reached the age of majority, I have inherited Caldwell House. It is currently being opened on my account. I intend to live in it, at least for a while, until I am called back into service. It will be strange to be back there without him after all these years. If visiting you alone was not too much of an imposition, I must admit that I asked your aunt if I might see your father's collection of military figures. She kindly obliged. I found seeing them quite moving in a way. Did you know he had painted his own regiment, the 18th Royal Hussars? I knew them instantly when I saw them. The Royal Hussars are easily recognised for their uniforms, dark blue with yellow braiding. He had painted my father too. If you do not have other plans for it, perhaps I might give that particular figurine a home in Caldwell House? I'm not sure if he told you, but your father came to see me after my guardian passed away. This was in London 3 years ago, shortly before I left for Gibraltar. He gave me his condolences, but he also left me his advice of sorts. He said that military men grow callous of death, but to do so was to doom one's judgment. The way to be a good officer was to feel each death acutely, yet act on none individually. That, he said, is how to excel. And yet, he added, it leaves a bitter taste in your mouth to do so. A sort of taste that lingers with you long after retirement. Strange advice, I think. Fortunately, none of the men under my command have ever suffered further than a broken leg. But enough of those past onwards for now. You must tell me something of yourself, though no doubt I will find much more when I visit. I remember well our little games and stories with much fondness. I still write poetry, I must admit, although it is quite as awful as it was back then. A lot of our adventures blur as childhood memories do, but I have a strange one that comes back to me. I insisted we dress as hideous ghosts to try to get Nicholas to atone for a crime of having painted your toy horse a horrible red colour. He was not scared, but we did terrify Mrs. Stewart. Is she still with you? I suppose I will also have to think further about household staff, myself. At any rate, I will see you shortly, and I will bring a marvellous ginger cake I have become far too fond of in London. We shall talk more then. Yours sincerely, Captain Rajeev Hughes. Alright, so we're not going to spend too much time on the cover of this one. It is another letter sent by Twopenny Post. If you want to know way too much about Twopenny Post, check out my first video. But I will note that Rajeev has also prepaid his letter, and that confirms for us something your aunt has already mentioned, which is that he is the head of his household now his guardian has passed away. Now, if we take a look at Rajeev's language, penmanship, and choice of ink and paper, it is very much what was expected of a gentleman's letter in the 1830s. The paper is a light cream and it's unadorned. The ink is a typical standard black writing ink. The writing is clear yet not too thick. It possesses some character and style, but isn't adorned with flourishes or anything horrific like that. So visually we can see this is someone who wants to appear as every inch the gentleman, without standing out in any particular way. Let's jump into the letter itself. We straight away learn 3 important things about Captain Rajeev Hughes. That he is the ward of Colonel Hughes, not his son, but that despite that, Colonel Hughes has left Rajeev his estate. We also learn that Rajeev recently reached the age of majority. So the age of majority in Regency England was 21. Before that age, the law viewed you as a minor, which means you needed permission to marry from your parent or guardian. You couldn't enter into a legally binding contract in your own right. And importantly here, you could not yet claim your inheritance. So until this point, the inheritance would have been held in trust for Rajeev. Now Rajeev has reached the age of majority, he has inherited the house in full, and is free to do what he wants with it without having to ask anyone, which no doubt makes moving back into it a lot more tempting. Since Rajeev has reached the age of majority relatively recently, he's likely 21 or 22 years of age, so 1 or 2 years younger than Agatha herself. I do want to take a moment here to talk about the name Rajeev. Since we learned that Colonel Hughes died in India and no doubt spent much of his life there, it's not hard to guess this is also where Rajeev was born. We don't know Rajeev's exact parentage, but there are 2 possible options. Either Rajeev has no biological connection to Colonel Hughes, but was taken in as his ward, or it is also possible that Colonel Hughes is in fact Rajeev's father, but that his parents were not legally married. Rajeev's mother and father might have been living together, and maybe even married under local law, but they were not married under British law. The fact that Colonel Hughes decided to bring Rajeev back to England as his ward when Rajeev was still very young does suggest that the latter is probably true. But Colonel Hughes does not want to advertise that he's had a child in this way, hence he refers to Rajeev as his ward, not his son. And there are plenty of stories from this time of very similar arrangements. Fathers taking their children born in India back to England was, while uncommon, by no means unheard of, and in fact in the Regency there were a notable set of elite socialites of South Asian descent. While in some cases effort was put in to hide the children's true parentage, some children did take the last name of their father, much as Rajeev has here with the last name Hughes. Some of the most famous examples are Kitty and William Kirkpatrick and Anne and Charles de Boyne. This brings me to one factual inaccuracy I did knowingly leave in this game, and that is the fact that Rajeev does not go by a British name. In every case I could find of a father coming back to England with his child in this way, they were given a British name on arrival. In fact, Anne and Charles de Boyne, who I mentioned earlier, were originally named Banu and Ali. However, I wanted Rajeev to keep his name as a homage to his roots. I think it's pretty clear from Rajeev, from his letters, from how intensely he's trying to be a British gentleman, that he has been swept up in this wave of British colonialism, which was, not great, and he's come to conceive of his life as one in England. And in fact, very few of these children of British fathers left England once they arrived there. If Rajeev had been real, I wonder what he would have thought about his personal relationship to India. It's a fascinating question. We learn as well that Captain Rajeev Hughes has followed his father into the army and is very much an army man. So let's talk about the topic I promised we would cover today, and that is the British military. Now, first things first, where did Captain rank in the army, and how did that compare to your father, who was a colonel? Rajeev would have joined the army somewhere between ages 16 and 21. We know he went to Oxford, although as an heir it's unlikely he sat for a degree. Most likely he attended Oxford at 17 for a single year and he joined the army at 18. When well-off gentlemen like Rajeev joined the army, they would purchase a commission, which means they would enter the army as officers. Rajeev would have started as an ensign or coronet, depending on his regiment. After a year or two, he could purchase a promotion to lieutenant, and then a year or two after that to captain, which he is now. A few years down the track, he'll progress to major, and then eventually lieutenant colonel, and that's as far as you can get by purchasing your promotion. After that, progression was at the auspices of the higher-ups, to colonel, and then for a rare few into the ranks of general. However, it wasn't just rank that was important in the military. Your regiment had a huge influence on the experience you'd have in the army. We learn in Rajeev's letter that both his father and your father were part of the 18th Royal Hussars. This is a cavalry regiment, which is much more desirable than an infantry regiment. It also meant that purchasing a commission cost a lot more. It could cost almost double. There's also much higher upkeep costs for cavalry regiments such as uniforms and horses that were not paid for by the army but by the officers themselves. The Hussars in particular were known for their uniforms, which Rajeev described as dark blue with yellow braiding. It was quite a desirable regiment to be a part of. So now you know all this about cavalry regiments. I did want to take a brief moment to dip into the letter you received on day 2 because it does bring up something very interesting. Weathering says this: "You might not know this, but when we first met, your father had joined my unit of dragoons as a gentleman volunteer. That's what they called them back then. Men from good families too poor to buy their first commission, waiting to be given one by merit or connections. Even then he had a way of devoting himself to those around him that was admirable. You have no doubt heard the story of how he received his first commission, the unfortunate French captain who mistook him for a member of their own side after the cavalry's uniform changed. So Weatherton mentions that your father joined his regiment of dragoons, a cavalry regiment, as a gentleman volunteer. And unlike Rajeev, as Weatherton said, gentleman volunteers did not purchase their commission. Instead, a gentleman volunteer applied to the commanding officer of a regiment to serve without pay, in the hope of filling a non-purchase vacancy. They fought in the ranks, but they socialized with officers. So why would your father do this? Well, there's two possible reasons. Reason one is the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars were a huge series of conflicts that started when Britain declared war on Napoleon's France in 1803. During these wars, there were heavy casualties among officers, which led to a lot of non-purchase vacancies. That meant that the deserving could be promoted without having to pay the heavy price of a commission purchase. So while your father was in the military at a very dangerous time, it was also a great time for his career. Reason number two, he didn't have anyone to pay for his commission. At the time when your father was a gentleman volunteer, he would not yet have inherited Ely Hall, and for reasons we don't know, his family didn't pay for his commission. This could have been because they were hard up and they lacked the money to do so. Maybe it was a hard time for the estate. Or it could have been because they disagreed with your father entering the army. A career as an army officer was a respectable one for a gentleman, but some families might not want their oldest son and heir to join the army at an extremely dangerous time. Whatever the reason, your father was so determined to join the cavalry that he took it upon himself to do so, even without that purchase of a commission. The story that Weatherton tells of an unfortunate French captain who mistook your father for a member of his own side is based on a true story. British cavalry changed their uniforms several times during the Napoleonic Wars. And the French cavalry had such a wide variety of uniforms that there were times it was hard to tell who was on which side in the chaos of battle. There was a point in time where the British 1st Hussars wore a blue jacket with scarlet facings and yellow lace, and the French 4th and 11th Hussars also wore a blue jacket with scarlet facings and yellow lace. Both sides also wore moustaches, and the Hussars were the only British regiments who were allowed to do so. Confusing. So that is a walkthrough of 1 and a bit letters from my late father's correspondence. I hope that gave you some insight into the historical context around the various military men who appear in the game. And if you're partway through the game and you find yourself intrigued, get ready because there are some very juicy letters to come.